All right, y'all. Today we're going to be starting Unit 4, which is on citizenship. So you can start your notes for today with Unit 4, citizenship. And as far as this unit goes, there's a few different topics that we're going to be looking at. Some of these topics we've already mentioned bits and pieces of before. We're just going to be looking at them in a little more detail in this unit. So some of the stuff we're going to be looking at, civics and citizenship. So what exactly it means to be a citizen. What are some of your responsibilities and your duties as a citizen? We're going to be looking at the Bill of Rights and then all of our amendments after the Bill of Rights. We'll be talking about some different Supreme Court cases, sources and types of laws, the American legal system, and then civil and criminal cases. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about civics and citizenship with this section of notes. So as far as civics in general is studying the rights, duties, and responsibilities of members of a nation or a state. So we'll look at in a minute what exactly a responsibility of citizens are, what duties are, what our rights are. But a citizen, as a general term, is somebody who is entitled to certain rights, and in turn, because they have those rights, they have to abide by certain duties and responsibilities that are expected of them. Now, this whole idea of citizenship, having certain rights that are guaranteed to you, and then in turn having responsibilities and duties as a citizen, originated in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, with this idea of a republic and a democracy, and the people having responsibilities within that government, and the government ensuring them certain rights because the people have those responsibilities and those duties. Now, as far as rights go, rights are something that you are entitled to as a human being. So regardless of any sort of other circumstances or factors, every single human being is entitled to certain rights. And when we look at those rights, we kind of split them up into three different categories. And those are security, equality, and liberty. So security means you should be protected from harmful behavior. So every single individual, every human on earth should be protected from other people trying to harm them. So in general, you should be protected from war, you should be protected from terrorism, you should be protected from other people that mean to do you harm. And then also our second category, equality, means that every single individual person should be able to have an equal opportunity to do things, regardless of their race, their religion, their gender. All of these things are things that shouldn't play a factor. Every single person should have equal opportunities to be successful and to live their life safely. And then our last one, liberty, means that everybody should be guaranteed basic freedoms, which those basic freedoms in the US, we kind of found those basic freedoms within our Bill of Rights in our Constitution. But those basic freedoms you can kind of just think of as like in our Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Every person should have the ability to pursue their life and pursue their passions in life without fear of being harmed and without being prevented from doing that because of external circumstances or inequality. Now, as far as your duties as a citizen, these are the things that you're required to do as a citizen. So if there is a duty that you have as a citizen, that's something you have to do. That is not optional. So in the United States and just in other countries in general, you have to obey the laws. You have to pay your taxes every year. Americans have to file their income tax depending on the state you live in. It could be state and federal, but everybody in the US has to pay federal taxes. And then in North Carolina, we also have to pay state income tax as well. Everybody has to serve jury duty. If you are summoned to serve on a jury, you have to serve that unless you have some kind of reasonable excuse for why you can't do that, which oftentimes people ask, like, what if I'm in college and my college is hours and hours away from where I'm being summoned to jury duty because it's back in my hometown? That's okay. That would be an acceptable excuse for not serving on a jury. But if you are summoned to jury duty, your employer, if you have a job, is supposed to give you paid time off. So you're not expected to have to make up those days or anything. It's an understanding that you have to serve on that jury if you're summoned to jury duty. Also attending school. That's why you're not allowed to drop out of school until a certain age, depending on the state that you are in. You are required to attend school as a citizen. And then also registering for the draft. All young men in the United States, once they turn 18 years old, they have to register for selective service. If you don't, you can actually get fined for it. So all of the young men in class, you got to register for the draft. And people often ask, well, why don't women have to do it too? Honestly, we haven't had a draft in decades. The last time we had a draft, women were not able to serve in any sort of combat positions in the military. So that's pretty much why women don't have to right now. If we did have a draft in the future, it could be a very real possibility that women would also have to register for the draft. Now, as far as our responsibilities go, these are things that you should do as a citizen. You don't necessarily have to, but you should do them. In general, being informed, trying to keep up with things that are happening in the news, in your country, and in your state. This is why oftentimes in class, when I have you all do our World Wednesdays, and I tell you we're just trying to be informed citizens, that's a thing you should try to do as a citizen, is keep informed on just what is happening in the world. Also, voting. You're not legally required to vote, but you should vote. It's also something, if you pay taxes, which all of you pay taxes, if you ever work a job, you're going to have to pay taxes. You probably would like to have a say in where those tax dollars are going. And voting is the easiest way that you can have a say in where your tax dollars are going to. And then as far as participating in the government, if there's things going on you're not happy with, or if there's things going on that you really do approve of, you should want to tell your representatives about it. You should want to be engaged with your government, or at least be a participant in it. Even if you don't really want to, you should still try to be a participant. Also, in general, just respecting others and understanding that others do have their rights just as much as you do, and respecting diversity, realizing that there's a lot of different people in the United States that come from a lot of different backgrounds, and we're all here living in this country together, and we have to respect each other's differences. Now, as far as the United States goes, we're generally called a land of immigrants. So if we look at about 10,000 years ago, when the first people arrived in North America, it was mainly Asian people migrating across a land bridge known as the Bering Strait to North America. And then if we look in about the 1840s into the late 1800s, we had a resurgence of Asian immigration, especially from Chinese immigrants coming into the United States during the gold rush. And then as we get into the 1400s and 1500s, and then even into the 1600s, when we saw Europeans, that was the sort of discovery of America that Columbus did on behalf of Europe. But basically, that's the largest number of immigrants that we see coming to the U.S. Once the U.S. does actually get founded in the 1700s. But that's mainly the people that found the United States are European immigrants. And then obviously we have a lot of Africans that are going to come to North America. Now, this is not chosen immigration. This is forced immigration through slavery that's going to happen starting in 1619 until 1808, when the transatlantic slave trade was outlawed by Congress. But at that point, there's over 500,000 slaves that had been brought to the United States, and there's going to be millions more that are born from slaves throughout these generations of people. So we also have to keep in mind, not all of the people who came to America chose to come here. They were forced to come here and forced to labor generation after generation. And then today, one of the largest groups of people that we see migrating to the U.S. Is from Latin America. And looking at all these different groups of people within the U.S. population, this is why it's important to understand that diversity does play an important aspect in the United States and in our culture, which allows us to have a much richer culture as a country, with people from all over the world coming here throughout our history. Now, as far as immigration goes, there's some different terms that we should know, and y'all have probably heard some of these terms before, but don't necessarily know exactly what they mean. So an immigrant is somebody who moves permanently to a new country. So this is somebody that is planning on becoming a citizen of that country when they move there. And now an alien is another term you may have heard before. Now this term typically has a negative connotation with it, because this is somebody that's going to another country, but they're planning on returning back to their home country at some point. But this, if we look at the actual definition, doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing. It's usually people that are coming to the U.S. for a short period of time, either for work opportunities or for schooling. It's not something that is necessarily negative, even though that word itself typically has a negative connotation with it. And now the next two terms, legal immigration and illegal immigration, are two things y'all have probably heard about. Legal immigration means that the person who is coming to the country has filed with the government and has been given permission from the government to be in that country. Oftentimes this comes in the form of a visa. And then illegal immigration is somebody who has not been given permission by the government to be in the country. And we'll look at that more, at what that process looks like here in a moment. So as far as being a natural born citizen goes and what exactly that means, people do meet the criteria of being a natural born citizen or a citizen at birth if you were born in the United States, in the 50 United States, if you're born in Washington, D.C., if you're born in a U.S. territory or on a U.S. military base somewhere else in the world. And then the other thing, so aside from just where exactly you were born, if your parents are U.S. citizens, then you are also a natural born citizen of the United States. Now, as far as the naturalization process goes, naturalization is something that's really important, because that's the process of becoming a citizen of the United States. And this process is something that in the U.S. Constitution is something that's determined by Congress, but it has changed a lot over time. And people often ask about people who do come to the U.S. without permission from the government. Well, why don't they just do it legally? We'll talk about the process here in a minute, and you might see why exactly it's a little more complicated than that. So the first step in this process is the person has to file a declaration of intent form with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Now, after having done this, they have to live in the United States for 5 years legally, or they have to live here for 3 years if they're married, also legally. So meaning they have to have already gotten a visa approved from the U.S. government before they came here when they filed that declaration of intent form. Now, after that 5 or 3 years, depending on the circumstances, then the person will meet with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And in this meeting, they have an interview. That's a very thorough interview, listening and looking into this person's background, trying to understand kind of who they are as an individual, making sure that they don't have any sort of involvements or associations with any sort of groups that could be threatening to the U.S. Then the next part is taking an exam. They have to take a reading exam, a writing exam, and a civics exam. If we had normal class, I would have you all look at what that civics exam looks like. But each of those exams they have to pass. And then after passing all of those exams, then they have to take an oath of allegiance to the United States. That oath of allegiance is basically saying that they swear against any other allegiances or ties that they have to any other governments or organizations, and that they swear an oath of allegiance to the United States government and its people. Now, one of the big reasons why people will choose to become citizens or choose to come to the U.S. in the first place is because of issues that they're dealing with in other countries. That could be economic issues, political issues, whatever it may be. But oftentimes, as I mentioned at the beginning of this slide, that if people are trying to come to the U.S., in a time of crisis, it may be kind of difficult for them to be able to be here and have the written permission of the government in the first place to be here. If you're fleeing a country that's having a political uprising and you're just trying to protect yourself and your family, might be kind of hard to be able to submit a form for a visa from the U.S. government. And if the U.S. government doesn't grant you that form and says you have to stay put where you're at, may be kind of hard to convince people to stay there, especially if it's a matter of if they stay there, them and their family could be in danger. A lot of people choose to not stay there then. Now, as far as this whole process goes, we'll look into it a little bit more and y'all do some terms on it. But our next section will be on the Bill of Rights, and that will be our next video that you'll look at.